The New Orleans Saints' curious salary cap strategy here in 2025 could be indicative of a 2026 split with quarterback Derek Carr. We got all of that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? I am your host, your friend, Ross Jackson, New Orleans native, your New Orleans Saints expert and credentialed member of the media covering those New Orleans Saints as the Saints beat writer over at LouisianaSports.net and Saints analyst with WWL TV. On today's episode of Locked On Saints, revisiting why the New Orleans Saints signed Velus Jones Jr. and designated him as a running back came with a lot of surprises, including how much more effective he's become in that position over the course of his 3 years in the NFL. We'll break that down. The New Orleans Saints linebacker room has needs, but youth might not be one of them. In fact, it might be experience that tops the needs list in that room. And we're going to kick everything off with the New Orleans Saints' curious salary cap strategy so far this offseason, stockpiling money for reasons that might have nothing to do with 2025 and everything to do with a new quarterback in 2026. We appreciate you very much, as always, for making us your first listen and for being an everydayer here on the show, which is a proud part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode brought to you by our friends over at Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL to get $20 off your first purchase. The New Orleans Saints are stockpiling money. They are stockpiling cash right now. Pay cuts, restructures, pay reductions, contract adjustments, reworked contracts, all this kind of stuff, incentive conversions, all these other things. Also, that they could stockpile somewhere between $28 to $32 million worth of salary cap space, which isn't necessary for free agency. So what is it that the New Orleans Saints are potentially building for? Well, it might have everything to do with 2026 as opposed to 2025. There's a couple of real possibilities here. I think the most likely possibility is the third one that I'll mention, but I'll kind of go through these so that you kind of understand what the other possibilities are as well. The first of which is that the Saints could be looking to stockpile money now so they can go and spend more in free agency. There's still good veterans available: Keenan Allen, Brandon Cooks at the wide receiver position, CJ Mosley at linebacker, other linebackers still available. We'll hit that here in just a sec. You've got guys like Tevin Jenkins still out there. Garrett Bradbury's out there. You've got players like Dalton Reisner still out there, Brandon Scherf. So like if you wanted to address the offensive line, all that other thing, but there's a fundamental issue with that theory that the Saints are stockpiling that money to be more active in free agency in the next wave, is that, well, you don't need all that money. You don't need all that money to be this active in free agency at this point, because when you're signing players to those deals, you're probably signing them to 2-3 year deals, and your void years and signing bonuses and all those other things. You're going to carry each one of those players a relatively low 2025 cap hit. You're not signing anybody that's literally going to cost you $20+ million here in 2025. That's not happening on the open market. And so that is something to consider. The second thing that's possible is that the Saints could be interested in the trade market. You have to be able to fit somebody under your salary cap window or through your salary cap window in order for you to be able to trade for somebody. And so if the Saints are going to trade for somebody that carries a $25 million salary cap hit, then it makes sense to make all this money, go out and trade for somebody, bring that person in with their $25 million salary cap hit, and then restructure or extend that player to lessen their cap hit in 2025. That is a viable option, although I don't know how active the Saints are in the trade market right now and what player they would be targeting at the amount that would require them to make up this amount of space just to get them in the building and then restructure the contract later. Then you can go out and spend that money however you want. Here's the other thing. And really, honestly, it could be a combination of any of these three things, but I think this is where things are most likely to be headed, is that the Saints are preparing for a rollover. And what I mean by rollover is not give up rollover on the 2025 season. What I mean is rolling over available funds at the end of the 2025 season in terms of salary cap over to the beginning of the 2026 season. What this does is effectively allows you to be able to prepare yourself to take on and deal with the dead cap that's on the way for a post-June 1 cut of Derek Carr. Here is the other possibility that kind of fits in with that same thing. This is still point 3 because it all kind of centers around the same deal. Is that the Saints could be, let's say that the relationship between the Saints and Derek Carr is just absolutely fried at this point. We discussed earlier this week that a trade of Derek Carr to another team this offseason is unlikely, though not impossible. So let's play the other side of that scenario. Let's play out the scenario in which the Saints do decide to trade away Derek Carr after June 1st of this year. Okay? What happens is the Saints take on $19 million of dead cap this season because it would be deferred the rest of it. That's okay. That's already accounted for. You can deal with that. That's not an issue. That doesn't really change much in terms of what you're looking at. In fact, you'll end up actually saving a little bit over $1 million at that point. The Saints would then end up incurring about $60 million of dead cap for 2026 as all of his remaining bonuses and prorations and stuff like that would all accelerate into the next year, which would be the deferred year. If the Saints were to roll over, let's say $20 million of salary cap from 2025 into 2026, that is $20 million that chips away at that $60 million of dead cap that you just accelerated into your new year. So it would allow you to help you balance your books a little bit to carry some of that money in. The other side of it is that you wait until next year, you release him as a post-June 1 cut, you'll take on and have to, carry some of his cap hit all the way through the end of June or through the beginning of June, and then his cap hit will adjust. It will help you with what that adjustment is by the time that his numbers change on the books come June 2nd. So in either case, it provides you with relief from the departure of a quarterback that is bringing on a big dead cap hit for your team. So there's a lot of possibilities in terms of where this could go, but I do think that this signifies the Saints sort of readying themselves for a split at quarterback, which is not the greatest situation to be in if you're an NFL team, right? Like if that's truly what the Saints are doing, it's not great to be preparing for your quarterback's release next June, here this March, knowing that there's an entire season that player is going to be your quarterback for the 2025 year. That's not a very comfortable scenario. There's no doubt about that. And this, again, we don't know that that's the case. We don't know that that's actually what the Saints are preparing for. They could be preparing for a trade this year. They could be preparing for a trade of Derek Carr this year. They could be preparing to just simply add more money or add more players to the roster this year. We don't really know in terms of why they're doing this, but it is interesting because we don't see the Saints do this very often. We don't see them stockpile cash. We see them usually make a little bit of money, spend a little bit of money, make a little bit of money, spend a little bit of money. This is simply out of the ordinary for New Orleans. And we don't know exactly what it's specifically connected to at this time, but what could happen is very, very intriguing. And some of it reflects maybe a little bit of where the relationship between the Saints and Derek Carr happened to be. So we'll see where things go. But this is an interesting scenario for the New Orleans Saints. And this is an interesting way for them to be managing their salary cap. There's no doubt about that. Coming up next, the New Orleans Saints linebacker room has a little bit of an underrated need. And while most of the roster is worried about getting younger, this is a spot where the Saints should actually be leaning into more experienced veterans. Let's get to that next as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by friends over at Gametime, the best place to go to get tickets to your favorite events, whether you're into comedy, theater, sports, musicals, much more. They've got everything that you're looking for over at Gametime, all on one app, giving you the most affordable prices that you're going to find. And a lot of times, the closer you get to the event, the more affordable the tickets get. I love Gametime. It's all that I use when I'm out of town, in town, does not matter. Curation as well that they have with Gametime picks is absolutely awesome. Makes it easier to find better value for tickets to all of your favorite events without having to sort through thousands and thousands of different ticket prices. And with their peace of mind, you get to see your seat views before you buy your tickets, no surprise fees, and the lowest price guarantee as well. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL to get $20 off your first purchase. That's promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, family. Linebacker might be one of the more underrated and under-discussed, if you will, needs left for the New Orleans Saints. We know some of the big needs, right? Left guard, certainly you need another starter in your offensive line. Wide receiver is a big one, where I think that veteran experience as well as youth could be very helpful. Starting cornerback could still be a position that they look at, as well as several other spots. But I do think that linebacker is a spot where right now, with the way that this roster is currently constructed, there needs to be something done for what we'll call the middle class of the linebacker room. Right now, you've got your starters and you've got depth, but there's a bit of a drop off in terms of experience when it comes from one of those groups to the other group. And so finding other experienced players could be something that is of major benefit for the second level of this New Orleans Saints defense. Let's break down why. Now, we've seen linebacker be a popular mock draft direction for draft experts with the New Orleans Saints. Guys like Jalen Walker from Georgia, maybe even Alabama's Jahad Campbell, these guys that can come in and be, kind of these quasi coverage linebackers, but also rush the passer, also be valuable for you and run defense, all those things. And I do think that youth at the position is important because you need to be ready for the future of your position. But if the Saints are trying to compete here in 2025, they have a major flaw in this room, and it's a simple drop off from experience. Let me explain. You know the two starters, Demario Davis and Pete Werner. No one's challenging that. But then once you get behind those two and you start looking at other players at the position, there's a major discrepancy in terms of games played, games started, things like that. So for instance, Demario Davis, 13 years experience, 196 games started. Pete Werner, 44 years of experience, 48 games started. Those are your top two guys. After that, Nephi Sewell, 3 years experience, 1 game started. DeMarco Jackson, 3 years experience, 0 games started. Anthony Orji, 2 years experience, 2 games started. Jalen Ford, 1 year of experience as a rookie last year, 0 games started. And for a lot of these guys, the times that they have appeared in games, played in games, were special team snaps being logged, not necessarily defensive snaps being logged. Now we know that that's not the case for Nephi Sewell, DeMarco Jackson, Anthony Orji. All three of those guys have gotten playing time at their position, but you don't see a ton of it for those guys for sure. And certainly when it comes to games started and years of experience, there's a major drop off. There's a major discrepancy between the top two starters and the guys that are behind them. So finding some people to kind of populate the middle of that trajectory, I think would be a good move for the New Orleans Saints. And there are some of those players that are certainly out there that would be able to help them do that. I mean, one guy they don't even have to go very far for. He's an outgoing free agent and somebody that the Saints could look to bring back. They have been running it back a lot so far this season after all. And so with that, bringing back a guy like Willie Gay Jr., who they signed on a 1-year deal last year and didn't necessarily fit Dennis Allen's defense, doesn't mean that he won't fit Brandon Staley's defense. Willie Gay Jr. makes a ton of sense. He's got 55 games of starting experience, actually more than Pete Werner. He's appeared in 72 games and he's got 5 years of experience. So that actually puts him in that mix of the quote unquote middle class of what the New Orleans Saints linebacker room could look like. And again, I know that his year last year with the New Orleans Saints wasn't stellar. He didn't get a lot of opportunities. And what it was that he does extremely well might be more maximized in Brandon Staley's scheme than it was in Dennis Allen's scheme. We've seen Dennis Allen defenses not necessarily bolster the talent of linebackers. They tend to go elsewhere and find success. The exception, of course, being a guy like Demario Davis, who showed up in New Orleans and became one of, or really was already one of the NFL's top linebackers, but now is finally starting to get some of the recognition as one of the NFL's top linebackers. And speaking of one of the NFL's top linebackers and former New York Jets linebackers, CJ Mosley is another name that I would absolutely be interested in if I'm the New Orleans Saints. Look, the idea of getting younger applies in some areas, and it's mostly an external wish. Saints aren't necessarily worried about getting younger. They want to be more talented. They want to compete. They want to be out there and, being able to compete for their division and all these other things. And sometimes a veteran will help you do that. And former New York Jets linebackers, in all fairness, have worked out well for the New Orleans Saints. Jonathan Vilma was acquired via trade. Demario Davis signed from one of his stints with the New York Jets to New Orleans as a former New York Jet himself. A guy like CJ Mosley, who brings in 10 years of playing experience and 132 starts, immediately gives you somebody that could be a depth player, might not be the role that he's looking for, but could be a depth player, and that ends up being able to help contribute with more experience, more leadership, more time on task, all these other things. I think that these are the things that could be very beneficial for the Saints linebacker room. Eric Kendricks is another one. Spent 2023 in Brandon Staley's Los Angeles Chargers defense with Brandon Staley at the helm, 10 years of experience with 142 total starts. And so again, somebody that ends up giving you a good depth option that has experience and familiarity with your defensive coordinator, and that brings you good leadership. We already know the Kendricks brothers as a whole to be, solid defensive players in the league, particularly Eric Kendricks, and the ability to be able to come in with experience, time on task, familiarity with teams, all these other things. I do think that there's value in that. Yes, it's not getting younger, but it is getting better. And I do think that that's something that this New Orleans Saints linebacker room is in need of. They don't have a lot of guys with a lot of experience. They don't have really any guys with more than a pair of games starting experience behind their top two guys. And so lining up these kinds of players does make a lot of sense. Now, the Saints can also go into the draft and invest in a linebacker as well. I've done that pretty often in my mock drafts. It's something that I think is of value. So whether it is one of those top names like a Jahad Campbell or like a Jalen Walker, if it's not that, though, you can go a little bit later in the draft. A Jack Kaiser out of Notre Dame is a guy that I like a lot. A little bit shorter, much like a Derek Carr out of Clemson. Both these guys, though, very athletic, very smart, good in coverage, good weak side coverage linebacker types, all of that. You can go a little bit later in the draft. Guys like Aaron Smith out of South Carolina State. You can go with guys like Cody Lindenberg out of Minnesota, Danny Sutzman out of Oklahoma. There's a lot of these players that could potentially end up being good investments for you at the position. If you don't even want to wait that long, there's also guys in the middle of the draft. Chris Paul Jr., the Ole Miss linebacker, somebody that I haven't talked about much, somebody that I really like, just over 6 foot, 235 pounds. It'd be good to maybe bulk up a little bit, but he could be a starting coverage linebacker in the NFL sooner rather than later. Hyper smart on the field, really, really good in terms of his athleticism and ability to move around and be able to, play sideline to sideline and everything, especially in today's modern era of the game. I think that that's something that could be massive for a team like the New Orleans Saints that should be looking to add talent to this roster. Chris Paul Jr., 4.63 40-yard dash with some good explosive metrics as well, 36-inch vertical jump, 9'9" broad jump. Just again, shows you athleticism, shows you his ability to be able to operate with explosion, get off the line, all these other things, can operate in coverage and as a pass rusher. Just having sort of that blend of the game on your inside linebacker core in a 3-4 defense is very much necessary. And to have somebody that you could also put outside and you don't know, is he going to rush or is he going to drop back in coverage? I think that there's some value there as well. Opposite Chase Young, for instance, who would be your stand-up full-time pass rusher as an edge rusher. So lots of different ways for the Saints to go. But I think just as much as just bolstering the talent on this roster is necessary, which you can do in the draft, I think that going to the veteran market makes sense here as well. Coming up next, New Orleans Saints went to the veteran market for our running back in Velus Jones Jr. I want to break down and tell you what I learned from watching all of his tape and what he could bring as a running back to the New Orleans Saints. We got that coming up for you next as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
The NCAA tournament is here, and so is the bracket breakdown.
Locked On Podcast Network and Amazon Fire TV channels are teaming up to deliver NCAA tournament coverage like never before. Watch studio shows featuring former players and Locked On's local experts as they guide you through every upset, buzzer beater, and bracket matchup.
Stream it all for free on Amazon Fire TV channel. Search Bracket Breakdown to see it all for free.
It's your team every day.
Get it, Who Dat Nation. The New Orleans Saints recently signed former Tennessee Volunteers wide receiver Velus Jones Jr. But over the course of the past 3 years in the NFL, he's actually got more carries and rushing yards than he has receptions, and receiving yards equal amount, rushing and receiving touchdowns, one each. And the Saints are looking at him more as a running back than as a wide receiver. This was first noted when the Saints sent out their press release or to announce the official signing, or the signing being made official, of Velus Jones Jr. And he was listed as a running back in their press release. We also got the chance to speak to him via Zoom on Tuesday. Sorry, I'm getting my days mixed up. On Tuesday. And one of the things that he mentioned was that the Saints watched his tape, really liked what he would be able to do, really liked what he looked like as a running back, and ended up signing him here to New Orleans to do that. And he said something when he was answering my question about that I thought was really interesting. He said, along the lines of kind of talking about his performance, he said it's something that he's very confident doing. And it's one of the reasons that he, quote, made it look so easy when he was talking about the preseason in the phone call or in the Zoom call on Tuesday, which I was really interesting because I've looked at like all of his regular season stuff, but then it forced me to go back to his preseason rushing stats from 2024. And he's right. He made it look easy. Total of 25 carries over the course of the 3 games that he played with the Chicago Bears in the preseason. His biggest game came in the preseason week 3 game up against the Kansas City Chiefs. But he had 25 total carries over the course of 3 games, 158 rushing yards, as well as 2 rushing touchdowns, no fumbles. Remember, that's been the big sort of critique of him, is ball carrying, ball handling, all that kind of stuff. So with that, he averaged 6.3 yards per carry over the course of the preseason. In the first game, he carried 6 times. He carried 6 times for 34 yards, average 5.7 yards. He had a touchdown in that game. In the third game, which I mentioned was his biggest game as a runner, and probably the biggest game as a runner of his career, 13 carries for 111 rushing yards and a rushing touchdown, averaged 8.5 yards per carry in that game, including a big 39-yard sweep run where he was rushing from out of the backfield. We're not talking about jet sweeps. We're not talking about a bunch of end arounds and stuff like that, particularly that third game up against the Kansas City Chiefs when he had 13 carries for 111 yards and that big 39-yard touchdown. That was a lot of him operating out of the backfield. When we go back and we look at his 20 carries over the course of his career in the regular season, it tells a little bit of a different story. Over the course of those 20 carries, 8 were jet sweeps, 5 were end arounds, and 7 were rushes from out of the backfield, which included like a dive up the middle, some pitches, as well as some stretch runs in terms of outside zone capabilities and things like that. But in that preseason game for the Chicago Bears, it was a lot of running out of the backfield and still sweeps and stretches and things like that got him to the outside, but not things that were like him running a jet sweep from the wide receiver position or running an end around the backside of the quarterback, all those things. There wasn't a lot of gimmicks in that game. Now that was preseason. That wasn't in his, in the regular season, going up against regular season competition and all those other things. And we know that the Kansas City Chiefs are notorious for not playing anybody during the preseason and stuff like that. So all of this has to remain in context in terms of expectations and stuff like that. But I will say this, there are some things that you can take away from here. That if Velus Jones Jr. gets treated as a full-time running back and utilized out of the backfield, while also contributing as like a kick returner and a punt returner and all those other things, he's shown a propensity to have good vision, good patience, the ability to let things kind of line up in front of him and then be able to take advantage of what is out there in front of him. He had taken one end around for a 42-yard touchdown. Actually, I apologize. It was an end around. I was right. It was an end around, not a jet sweep. So jet sweep is when you're running and you're staying kind of right behind the line of scrimmage. And as the ball is snapped and handed to you in that situation, you're just kind of crossing behind the line of scrimmage. End around is when you're kind of wrapping around the quarterback and going around. And then a reverse is if that ball gets handed to somebody else and then they pitch it to you as you cross by. So just as a quick refresher on like the difference between all those things. And so the end around that went from the quarterback to Velus Jones Jr. back in 2022, that went for, I think it was like 49-yard touchdown. One of the things that happened up against the Minnesota Vikings is that he gets to the sideline. There's like 3 Vikings that are standing there. He splits all those defenders and then just runs down the right sideline on a play that it's one of those ones where if you froze it at one point and it took a snapshot of that, you could post it on Twitter and be like, Velus Jones Jr. scored a touchdown on this play. And people would be surprised because he's got like 2 or 3 defenders all around him. And maybe it was one of those situations where one defender thought the other one was going to tackle, who thought the other one was going to tackle, who thought the other one was going to tackle. And so therefore they all didn't tackle. But that's just not how you play defense in the NFL. So that there is that part for sure. But I think what you see is someone that's patient, somebody that has the good vision and good identification for following his blockers, all those other things. And then when things get set up, is able to go out there and make some plays based off of that. So will he be the Saints' second running back this year behind Alvin Kamara? I have no idea. We'll see. I don't even know if they might still invest in this position in the draft. It's a very, very deep running back draft class. Even if you wanted to wait and grab a guy like Ollie Gordon out of Oklahoma State, somebody that can come in and be a massive pass protector for you and that can run the ball very physically between the tackles, all those other things. There's some value there in terms of what a guy like that could potentially bring you. And so even if they don't go early for a guy like a Travion Henderson or an Ashton Jeanty or a Omarion Hampton or a Caleb Johnson or a Dylan Sampson. I mean, you get the idea. There's so many here. Going later on in the draft is still an option for New Orleans. And so they're going to continue to have competition at this position, I imagine. You still have Clyde Edwards-Helaire. You still have Kendre Miller. You still got Jordan Mims. You still got Xavier Holiday. The Saints did move on from Jamal Williams, but the Saints are in a situation here to where now that they've invested in Velus Jones Jr., they have a pretty crowded running back room. And a running back room that's going to benefit from competition. Because again, you want these guys to develop, and sometimes the development comes from competition, right? You drive the competition in order to drive the development. Sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. But one of the best ways to do that is to get as many bodies in that competition as possible. That way your likelihood of one of them developing becomes more likely, right? Goes up. And so I wouldn't be surprised to see the Saints go that route. But I do think that the addition of Velus Jones Jr. is an interesting one. One of the guys that he models his game after, we talked about, Deebo Samuel comparisons in terms of role, not necessarily talent level, but in terms of role. You look at Cordero Patterson as another one of those guys. The guy that he models his game after, Velus Jones Jr., is Percy Harvin. And that makes sense. Guy that could do a little bit of everything, be a returner, be a runner, be a wide receiver, catch passes out the backfield, but also line up out wide, line up in the slot and be able to run routes as a receiver, all those other things. So it could be very interesting, right? Ty Montgomery is another name that comes to mind. And the Saints tried that under Sean Payton. Kind of worked, kind of didn't work. Could Kellen Moore get something out of this? We'll certainly see. But this is not a signing that I would balk at and say, oh, he's just a camp body. There's something really interesting here. Whether it works out or not, it remains to be seen. Right? And the expectation should be that it might work out, it might not work out, but who knows? But if the expectations do come to fruition here, this could be a really interesting signing that we look back on and go, oh, yeah, that was a huge signing by New Orleans. So we'll see where things go with them. And, we know the criticisms and stuff like that. Ball carrying, ball handling, all those other things. But if you get all that under control and have a role that supports him here, could be very, very interesting. Coming up in tomorrow's episode, I want to dive into some more of the contract moves that were made. Cedric Wilson Jr. remains here in New Orleans after taking a pay reduction, but could we expect to see a bigger role for him because of his relationship with Kellen Moore? We'll find out. So we're going to dive into some of those other contract questions in tomorrow's episode. We appreciate you very much, as always, making us a part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me on the show. If you see me, please say hi. If you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on your favorite social media at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you're living. Let me know how you're momming them. And trust Who Dat Nation, I'll holla at you.